On a quiet September morning, 17-year-old Jessica Dishon left home, but never returned. Her car, with the keys still inside, was found just steps from her door. Weeks later, her body was discovered, and the case took a disturbing turn. Investigators initially suspected David Brooks, but with no solid evidence, he walked free. Years later, a shocking confession from a prison inmate pointed to someone much closer, Jessica's own uncle, Stanley Dishon. He had allegedly abused her for years and, fearing she'd expose him, kidnapped and murdered her. Despite multiple warnings, including a 2002 letter detailing his confession, police failed to act. It wasn't until 2015 that Stanley was finally arrested. Facing overwhelming accusations of past sexual abuse, he took a plea deal, admitting to manslaughter but avoiding a full murder trial. Jessica's father vowed revenge if Stanley ever walked free. Meanwhile, Brooks remained a mystery, possibly manipulated into helping dispose of evidence. He died in 2021, taking secrets to his grave. This case is a haunting reminder: missing persons reports must be taken seriously, and no suspect, no matter how close, should be overlooked. In September 1999, in the quiet town of Shepherdsville, Kentucky, an event unfolded that shook the local community. Jessica Dishon, a 17-year-old girl, vanished under mysterious circumstances, leaving behind a trail of questions and suspicions. Her disappearance and the subsequent investigation played out like the plot of a gripping yet tragic film, proving that reality can sometimes surpass even the most chilling fiction. Jessica was born on May 2, 1982, the eldest of 3 children. From a young age, she displayed remarkable independence, often helping her parents care for her younger brothers. At 15, she took a part-time job at a local restaurant, determined to save up for her dream car, a red Pontiac. Despite her demanding schedule, Jessica excelled in school and aspired to attend college to become an accountant. By the fall of 1999, Jessica was in her senior year of high school, and her future seemed bright. She had recently started dating someone and was filled with hope for the years ahead. However, everything changed on September 10th. That morning, Jessica's parents left for work as usual, and her younger brothers went to school. Jessica, planning to drive herself to class, stayed home a bit longer, but when her mother returned around 1 p.m., she immediately noticed something strange. Jessica's car was still parked in front of the house. This was unusual, as she should have been at school by then. Growing increasingly concerned, Jessica's mother tried contacting her husband, but to no avail. He confirmed that he had left for work alone that morning. Approaching her daughter's car, she was met with an unsettling sight. Jessica's books, work clothes, and purse were left on the back seat. A closer look revealed something even more alarming. It appeared that Jessica had attempted to dial 911 but had been unable to complete the call. The idea that she had simply left of her own accord seemed unlikely, given how far their home was from town. Jessica's parents immediately contacted the school, only to learn that she had not attended any classes that day, a violation of school policy, as they should have been informed of her absence much earlier. Their anxiety deepened when Jessica's best friend, who worked with her at the restaurant, called to say that she had failed to show up for her shift. Faced with this distressing situation, Jessica's parents went to the sheriff's office to report her disappearance and the suspicious circumstances surrounding her abandoned car. However, their concerns were met with indifference. Even the discovery of a single sneaker left inside the vehicle failed to raise alarm. Frustrated by the authorities' lack of urgency, they tried to convince the sheriff of the gravity of the situation. Meanwhile, search dogs led investigators to a barn, where they uncovered a pair of black gloves bearing traces of decay. Throughout the investigation, a man named Brooks exhibited suspicious behavior, particularly when officers approached the area where he had been burning items. Despite this, the police found no direct evidence linking him to Jessica's disappearance and ultimately dismissed their concerns. Disheartened by law enforcement's inaction, Jessica's parents resolved to take matters into their own hands. Desperate for answers, Jessica's parents turned to the FBI. Although the Bureau typically does not initiate investigations at the request of a missing person's relatives, this time, agents decided to intervene. The disturbing details uncovered by Jessica's parents suggested that something serious had indeed happened to her. From that moment, a full-scale investigation began, one that the local police had refused to conduct. FBI agents collected fingerprints from Jessica's room and car, seizing all potential physical evidence for laboratory analysis. Simultaneously, they launched extensive searches of the area, deploying helicopters and mobilizing volunteers. Investigators even examined the bottom of a nearby pond in case her body had been hidden there. As the case progressed, suspicion fell on 35-year-old Joseph, the brother of a man named Brooks, whose behavior had already raised concerns. However, the investigation faced a critical challenge. No direct evidence linked the brothers to Jessica's disappearance. Without substantial proof, authorities were unable to make an arrest, leaving investigators to focus on finding the missing girl. By this point, they were almost certain she was no longer alive. 17 days after Jessica's disappearance, on September 27th, the police received a chilling call. A woman driving near a river, where Jessica's father and friends had searched in the early days, noticed something unusual. Stopping by a tree a few dozen meters from the road, she saw what appeared to be a human body and immediately contacted authorities. FBI agents rushed to the scene and made a grim discovery. The body of a young girl was found, missing fingers and limbs. A rope, bearing traces of red and silver paint, was tied around her legs. Some of her clothing was absent, suggesting the possibility of sexual violence. Due to the advanced state of decomposition, visual identification was impossible, prompting investigators to seek help from Jessica's parents. Jessica's father, overcome with grief, could not bring himself to look at the body. Her mother, however, stepped forward. Though she could not recognize the face, her eyes fell on a small butterfly tattoo, identical to the one her daughter had. Forensic experts later confirmed the body's identity and determined that Jessica had been strangled to death. Further examination revealed numerous scratches on her body, and experts concluded that her limbs and fingers had been removed post-mortem. But the most devastating revelation was yet to come. Jessica had remained alive for approximately 3 days after her disappearance. This horrifying detail meant that had authorities acted sooner, they might have had a real chance to save her. With this new evidence, FBI agents resumed their interrogations. One man, who had previously claimed to have seen Jessica near her home on the morning she vanished, suddenly changed his story, now insisting that he had not seen her that day at all. However, instead of confirming his previous statement, the man now claimed that he had been at home in bed with his wife at the time of Jessica's disappearance. When detectives questioned his wife, she directly contradicted his alibi, denying that he had been with her. Seeking to gauge his reaction, FBI agents posed a hypothetical question. What would he do if his fingerprints were found on the victim's body? Although no such evidence actually existed, his response raised suspicions. He stated that in such a case, he would have no choice but to confess to everything. Despite these alarming inconsistencies, the chances of securing a conviction remained low due to the lack of direct evidence linking Brooks to the crime. Investigators had only a collection of disturbing but ultimately circumstantial clues pointing to his involvement. Determined to build a stronger case, they continued their efforts to gather additional evidence while preparing for trial. During the investigation, authorities recalled a crucial detail. While searching Brooks' car, they had discovered a coil of rope that closely resembled the one used to bind Jessica's legs. However, no DNA evidence was found on it, making it inadmissible as definitive proof. This, too, remained circumstantial. The trial finally began in January 2003. Brooks' defense attorney seized on the complete lack of direct physical evidence, emphasizing its absence to the jury. Then, another shocking revelation emerged. When Jessica's body was first discovered, investigators had ignored large, keep refrigerated labels on the evidence storage boxes. As a result, the boxes were left at room temperature, leading to the loss of all potential DNA evidence due to decomposition. This mishandling proved to be a devastating blow to the prosecution. With no conclusive forensic proof, all other evidence of Brooks' guilt remained too weak to convict. Ultimately, the jury failed to reach a unanimous verdict, and he was released. According to state law, he could only be retried if new evidence emerged. For Jessica's parents, the verdict was a devastating injustice. They were convinced that Brooks was responsible for their daughter's death. Adding to their anguish was the belief that had law enforcement taken the case seriously from the very beginning, their daughter might have been saved. With the trial ending in failure, their hope for justice faded. Over the next several years, the case stagnated, and public interest waned. However, in 2012, a shift occurred. Detective Lynn Hunt joined the local department and was assigned to work on cold cases. After reviewing numerous files, she decided to focus on Jessica Dishon's murder. As Hunt delved into the case, She was appalled by the sheer unprofessionalism of her predecessors. Many official documents contained errors, key witness interviews had not been properly recorded, and critical physical evidence had been mishandled. In essence, she was forced to restart the investigation from scratch, 13 years after Jessica's murder. Her first step was to speak with Jessica's family. One of Jessica's brothers, now an adult, handed her a box containing his sister's belongings from her car. He had kept the items ever since law enforcement had returned them to the family. Hunt was once again struck by the incompetence of previous investigators. These crucial pieces of evidence had never been stored properly in the department's warehouse, as required by protocol. As she continued to dig deeper, another revelation surfaced. A psychological evaluation conducted years earlier revealed that a key suspect had an IQ of only 61, an extremely low score, casting doubt on the previous police actions, including Brooks' interrogations, were now called into question. Given his extremely low IQ, measured at just 61, there was a strong possibility that he had not fully understood the questions posed to him during questioning. His confused or contradictory answers could have been the result of cognitive limitations rather than deception. This revelation led Detective Hunt to reconsider Brooks' involvement in the case. His strange behavior, which had initially seemed suspicious, might simply have been a reflection of his intellectual challenges rather than guilt. With this new perspective, Hunt expanded her investigation, exploring alternative theories and potential suspects. She meticulously reviewed every individual mentioned in the case, as well as those who lived nearby, hoping to uncover overlooked evidence. This effort continued until September 2014, nearly 15 years after Jessica's tragic death, when an unexpected lead emerged. One day, Hunt received a call from a colleague working in another jurisdiction. He reported that an inmate at a Kentucky state prison had come forward, claiming to know the true identity of Jessica Dishon's killer. Hunt approached the tip with skepticism. In her experience, incarcerated individuals often fabricated stories in an attempt to negotiate early release or improve their prison conditions. However, she also knew that she couldn't afford to ignore potential leads, no matter how unlikely they seemed. The inmate in question had shared a cell with another prisoner, and during their time together, they had discussed their past crimes. According to the informant, his cellmate had confessed to murdering Jessica Dishon. When the detective heard the suspect's name, she was stunned. It was Stanley Dishon, Jessica's uncle and her father's brother. The informant provided disturbing details. He claimed that Stanley had subjected Jessica to years of sexual abuse during her childhood while living in their home. To ensure her silence, he had repeatedly threatened to harm her or someone she loved if she ever told anyone about the abuse. By the spring of 1999, Jessica had entered a relationship with a boy her own age, someone she genuinely liked. This development made Stanley deeply uneasy. He feared that, in confiding in her boyfriend, she might finally reveal the truth about the years of abuse. His paranoia quickly escalated into rage. He reportedly referred to Jessica's boyfriend with contempt, calling him a little bastard and hurling insults at her. As his frustration grew, so did his aggression. On the morning of Jessica's disappearance, she had finally had enough. She refused to listen to Stanley's threats and, for the first time, she fought back. She warned him that if he didn't leave her alone, she would tell someone about everything he had done to her. Stanley reacted with fury, escalating his threats. Panicked and desperate, Jessica reached for the phone, attempting to dial 911. After this confrontation, Stanley tried to grab Jessica. He then abducted her and took her to an abandoned barn near the location where her body would later be discovered. For several days, he kept her captive, subjecting her to unimaginable abuse and sexual violence. Eventually, he ended her life. After killing her, he deliberately placed her body in a visible location to ensure it would be found. He then buried the bedsheets used during the crime beneath the barn. In a twisted attempt to mislead investigators, Stanley mutilated the victim's body, removing some of her limbs to make it appear as though drug traffickers were responsible. The informant recounted this chilling confession in detail. He said he had Jessica for a couple of days and then took her life. The reason he mutilated her was to make it look like the work of a cartel. Detective Hunt immediately took note of a crucial detail. The fact that Jessica's body was missing limbs had never been made public. Only her closest relatives and investigators knew this information. The informant could not have fabricated such a detail, making his statement all the more credible. The inmate also revealed one final piece of information. Stanley had buried Jessica's missing sneaker under a fallen tree near the barn. Some of her personal belongings are under a fallen tree in that area, he said. Determined to verify this claim, Detective Hunt enlisted the help of Jessica's brother and other relatives, though she did not immediately disclose that Stanley was the prime suspect. She needed definitive proof before revealing such devastating news. On the first day of the search, pouring rain made their efforts difficult. They dug in multiple locations matching the informant's description, but found nothing. The next day, Jessica's brother accompanied Hunt once more. During their journey, he pointed out an abandoned barn, suggesting they search there. As soon as they began digging, they made a long-awaited breakthrough. Beneath the barn, they unearthed a set of bed sheets, unchanged since the day of Jessica's disappearance. Hunt wasted no time in verifying the discovery. She contacted Jessica's mother, who quickly confirmed that the sheet was part of Jessica's bedding set. The pattern matched exactly, and a sheet had indeed been missing from her daughter's bed. With this damning evidence, Stanley was arrested. During interrogation, he refused to confess, but his body language betrayed him. He visibly trembled throughout the questioning. Given the overwhelming evidence against him, Stanley was formally charged, and the case was taken to court. Jessica's father was in disbelief. The thought that his own brother could have done something so horrific to his daughter was unbearable. For a long time, he remained in a state of denial. However, as the truth unfolded, he was forced to accept the unimaginable. Looking back, he recalled a chilling detail. During the initial days of Jessica's disappearance, it had been Stanley who suggested searching for her body near the river. But during the search, he suddenly became nauseous and insisted on driving his brother home. It later became clear why. This moment occurred just a few hundred meters from the barn where Jessica had been held. Stanley had led them away from the truth, ensuring that they wouldn't find her. While preparing for trial, Detective Hunt continued to investigate Stanley's past, searching for additional evidence. She already knew that he had served time for sexually assaulting another young girl in the family. However, as she dug deeper, something even more disturbing came to light. Several other women, all closely related to Stanley, came forward with their own harrowing accounts of abuse. Their stories followed a chillingly similar pattern. Stanley, lacking a stable home, would ask to stay with relatives. Once left alone with the young girls, he would prey on them, subjecting them to horrific abuse and silencing them with threats. As the police compiled these testimonies, a horrifying realization emerged. Stanley had been committing these crimes for over 3 decades. Despite these revelations, Hunt knew that securing a conviction for Jessica's murder would be difficult. There was no direct physical evidence, no fingerprints or DNA linking him to the crime. But then, as she meticulously reviewed old case materials, she made a shocking discovery. Inside a box of files, Hunt found a letter dated June 26, 2002. Written by an informant, it detailed the same confession Hunt had only recently heard from an inmate in Kentucky prison, 12 years later. Incredibly, as early as the summer of 2002, Stanley had already confessed to murdering Jessica. At that time, he was serving a sentence for sexually assaulting an underage relative. While in prison, he had told his cellmate about the killing, and the cellmate, cooperating with authorities, had written to the police, revealing everything, but the letter had been ignored. It seemed the police, so fixated on Brooks as the prime suspect, had dismissed any alternative theories, never even considering Stanley as a possible perpetrator. Hunt was deeply disappointed. If her colleagues had done their jobs properly, Jessica's case could have been solved back in 2002. Now, all she could do was wait for the trial and hope that Stanley would finally face justice. The trial began in 2015, with Stanley pleading not guilty. Jessica's parents sat in the courtroom, unable to bring themselves to look at the man who had destroyed their lives. What hurt them even more was his refusal to confess, to ease their suffering by finally admitting the truth. The prosecution was aware that securing a conviction for murder would be an uphill battle. In addition, the sexual abuse charges presented another challenge. Each of Stanley's victims would have to take the stand, recount their trauma, and endure cross-examination as his defense attempted to cast doubt on their testimonies. Given these obstacles, the prosecution offered Stanley a plea deal. In exchange for pleading guilty to multiple sexual crimes and the manslaughter of Jessica, the state would drop its pursuit of the death penalty. In the end, Stanley agreed and admitted his guilt. However, under the terms of the agreement, he was not required to reveal any details about the murder itself. For his crimes, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison, with the possibility of applying for early release after serving 15 years. At the time of sentencing, Stanley was 56 years old, meaning that he could be released at the age of 71. As the sentence was announced, Jessica's father made a chilling statement after the trial. If his brother didn't die in prison, he would be waiting for him upon his release to settle the score himself. In 2019, Stanley gave his first interview, maintaining his innocence in Jessica's murder. He claimed he had been at work that morning, but after 2 decades, verifying his alibi was impossible. What he couldn't explain, however, was how 2 unrelated informants, who had never met, could provide nearly identical accounts of the crime, including details that only the killer could have known. As for David Brooks, detectives have never completely ruled out the possibility of his minor involvement. Stanley knew him and might have asked for his help in disposing of Jessica's belongings. Given Brooks' low intelligence, he may not have fully understood the gravity of what he was doing. It's possible that he was the one burning Jessica's clothes in the fire and that the gloves, which had traces of decomposition, were given to him by Stanley. Jessica's photo, found in Brooks' barn, could also have been planted to frame him. However, the full truth may never be known. Brooks passed away in 2021 due to heart problems. Even now, there are lingering uncertainties. Jessica's younger brother once claimed that on the morning of her disappearance, he heard her scream for help outside their house. At that time, she was most likely still alive, but Stanley had already taken her to the barn, several kilometers away. Was it possible the child's mind had played tricks on him due to stress? Could someone else have been screaming? Or was there a more disturbing explanation? There's even a theory, though unlikely, that Jessica was in Stanley's car at that moment, gagged or unconscious, as he pulled up to the house. This tragic case serves as a stark reminder of the importance of taking every missing persons report seriously, especially when it involves children or teenagers. It also underscores the need for professional and thorough investigative work from the very beginning, as the first hours and days after a disappearance are often crucial. Additionally, this case highlights the importance of recognizing signs of family violence and not ignoring red flags, even when they come from those closest to us. What do you think about this case? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and follow me on other social media platforms. You'll find the links in the description below. Until next time.